All right, welcome all in everybody for another Saturday morning edition of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A wild night on Thursday with a ton of great games, and obviously the big one being Oregon State's upset of Gonzaga at Gill Coliseum. And with that, I did bring in uh, Sam Whiteley and Andy Clark from the Payton Years podcast. You can catch them on all your streaming services. This matchup the other night was wild, and I just wanted to get your immediate reaction to the 97-89 overtime win, getting the Zags for the first time in 34 years and getting the win.
Well, I want to point out, first of all, that Oregon State remains undefeated all time against Gonzaga. I want people to remember that before the 90s, they'd played a fair amount of times. Oregon State had never lost. That continues, but I don't want to speak for Sam, but I think that was the best Beaver basketball game I have seen in at least a half decade, maybe since, I don't know. It's truly unbelievable to watch. Michael Rataj playing at the top of his game, Parsifala, everyone having a good game. The best shooting percentage for a team since 2006 for Oregon State. So a historic night.
We're getting into pretty rarefied air for Beaver basketball, especially lately, but really the past 34 years. I'll put the caveat, it's the best regular season win in at least 5 years. They did beat Arizona last year, which was another magical Gill night. They didn't quite sell that one out. It's the first true sellout at Gill since 2019, I think. They beat Payton Pritchard his senior year there, and that was a pretty memorable one. But all things considered, I would put this game Thursday on top of either of those two.
I mean, thinking about this game again, like you talk about, like the fact that yes, there was an Arizona game a year ago and getting that win, but the implications of this win obviously are very different with this team kind of on that outskirts of the at-large bubble. They're right there. They're 14-5 going into this one. Now with the signature win, it's how much more excitement maybe did you have thinking about the at-large potential before the game on Thursday and now after the game? What's kind of now the feeling about like what this team is, the potential for this squad is going to be?
Well, Sam and I talked about at the start of the season on the podcast a lot that this feels like a team that had potential to get an at-large bid if they could get a top 3 spot in the WCC, because we think that the conference as a whole is really strong, and you've seen multiple teams come from this league. And Oregon State, before this game, they've had losses, but they've had no bad losses, close losses. I mean, the LMU loss was a tough one. You can kind of write that off, but the Oregon loss, the North Texas loss, the Nebraska loss, all good teams, all away games, but they didn't have a signature win. They didn't have something that you could kind of like point to on the resume and say, hey, we compete at top level and we take out elite teams. So I think this really opens the path and honestly puts a lot more pressure on the Beavers now, because now you can't afford any bad losses and you have to continue to make a push to get that top 3 seed in the WCC. And it just puts more pressure on them because they know that now it is a legitimate possibility. It's not just kind of like wishy-washy dream talk of getting into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think that even if that game Thursday goes a little bit differently and they end up getting beaten overtime, I would still be sitting here saying that they have a path to an at-large. At that point, the odds would have been pretty slim, but with a quad 1 win over a team as good as Gonzaga, and I know they've had some end-of-game issues, but I mean, the takeaway I had for Gonzaga is that before Thursday, all their losses were to very, very good teams. And I think that's still true, that the Beavers' resume isn't amazing at this point, but when you add a quad 1 win to it, I think the path is there. There's enough in front of them that they can make the tournament without winning the WCC tournament. They play St. Mary's twice. They play Gonzaga again. They get another shot at the 2 conference teams that have beat them. I think Santa Clara is pretty good, and a 1-point road loss shouldn't hurt your resume too much. But yeah, I think it's in front of them, which is again kind of rarefied air even in mid-January for this program the last 3 decades or so.
And thinking about, like, again, the expectations, you guys talked about what your expectations were. A lot of people didn't have those expectations for this team, especially coming off of 2 very poor years the last few years. And thinking
Well,
about
three.
three, you're
One
right.
historically
since
bad and two regular bad ones. Yeah.
and looking at this team, it's also just number of the players that have come in, obviously via the portal and whatnot. But the key, the center of this has been Michael Ratai and his development. You've been able to watch him over these last few years. Kind of talk about what just the growth you've seen from him, and really almost like the culmination of everything that we have seen from him, his development. The other night, career high 29 points, and it seemed like every time the Beavers needed a bucket, Ratai was there to give it to them.
Yeah, there was a really good piece done by Nick Dashel, the Oregon Live, just covering the afterwards of the game, and he had a great quote. I believe it was from DeMarco Minor, and he said, "Everyone on this team has jobs. Michael's job is to finish games." And you've seen him take over and be kind of the undisputed leader on this team. And I think, first off, I think this game really kind of legitimizes his case to be WCC Player of the Year, kind of going up head to head with Graham Ike like this. I know that he's been in a top 5 discussion, but I think that was more like a tip of the cap as opposed to like a legitimate candidacy. And I think this type of game is a statement game for that. He was really playing a little bit of outside of position the last couple of years because they had another power forward who's leading scorer on UCLA right now, Tyler Bilodeau, who was a good player, but it kind of forced Ratai a little bit to the 3, didn't let him take advantage of how strong and what a good inside game he has. Plus, he was pretty hurt last year with shin splints. So you're seeing kind of the actualized or finalized version of him. And it's something that people always talked about. Like he had a little bit of NBA kind of buzz coming in as a freshman because he's played really well in FIBA competitions for Team Germany. He was their captain of their like 20 team or whatever.
Or 20, yeah.
Yeah, 18 and 20. So he's had a really good like overseas FIBA career where you've seen him hit outside jumpers and still play inside. But actualized version seems so confident, and he's a great kid. He's been on our podcast. He's a really nice, super smart kid, the type of like natural kind of instinctual leader that if he's the best player on your team, you feel like they have a pretty good head on their shoulders overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into this year, we were obviously thankful that he was one of the few guys from last year. The best returning player from last year's team. You could make the case that if Nate Kings was healthy, it could have been him, but he missed all of last year with a torn MCL. But I would have described him as a glue guy, a guy who's scoring out. His averages across the board will probably improve this year. But with all the talent they brought in from the portal and then mostly from overseas, I'm kind of shocked that he's blossomed into this all-around weapon and probably team MVP. And you could make a case for Minor and Parsifala and maybe even Kings in that role. But after what we saw Thursday, I think you got to hand it to Ratai. And so it's not a surprise to see him successfully grow into a bigger role. But this has been a bit extreme. I mean, I agree with Andy that he went from comfortably in the first team all WCC before Thursday to legitimately one of, I think it's probably a 2-man race between him and Ike for Player of the Year, right? I mean, you could say Nembhard as well. It's tough when you've got a teammate who's also in the discussion. It kind of splits the vote a little bit, and we'll see what happens. But I think it's between those 3 guys.
Yeah, and it's like it's going to be fascinating to see like the Player of the Year conversation. I do think you'll see one of them tonight in Malik Thomas as well.
Yeah.
He's going to be in that conversation as well. Guy who can drop like 30 on any given night. But we'll get into USF in just a little bit. But this Oregon State team, like the momentum that there was, and like I think about like the environment that was in that building the other night. And obviously Gonzaga kind of does this in a lot of places. Like they are the big dog. They are the team that everyone wants to upset. But what do you think, like just like momentum wise, is this sort of game is going to give maybe the fan base? Because it feels like now it's like you get this sort of win, and now there's like legit momentum and energy behind what this team could be the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think it's been growing kind of steadily, especially because, the women's program had a mass exodus of players. And that was by far for years, their games were very crowded and their energy was really good. And that fan base, I think, is starting to come back to the men's side this year because it's a really likable team. Like the kids are all really nice. They've got interesting stories. They're from all over the world. And that sellout crowd, Wayne Tinkle is 4-0 or now 5-0 in sellouts. Gill has an incredible home record when you can fill that place out because it feels like everyone's right on top of you. But the difference between this win and the one in 2019 is that this really keeps like winning a conference in play for the Beavers. And that's something the men's team hasn't even thought of doing, in 10, 15 years. So I think that will naturally start bringing people back in. And I'm really curious to see how much it trickles over, or how much it keeps going, because they've had sellouts in the past, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's coming all back. But with the way this team is playing, I think you could see definitely an increase.
Go ahead, Zach.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Sam.
It's just such a special thing, and then it is kind of the Gonzaga effect. I mean, we're fitting right into the WCC. That, of course, the best turnout of the year is when Gonzaga comes to town. But what stood out to me, I mean, it's Andy and I talk about Beaver bias being in the universe, and we lament that it does feel like, whether we're exhibiting our own bias or not, that in a lot we feel like the Beavers don't get the home whistle that a lot of teams do, and I think they got it on Thursday. It doesn't mean that the referees were bad by any means, but the fifth foul against Ike shocked me a little bit.
Yeah.
In fairness, he did travel on his three with about 5 seconds left in the game, so it's not as if the Zags were given too short at the end of the stick.
Nemhard traveled. Ike was fine.
It was a sloppy end of play. They should have.
I think you could have given a travel to both. Nemhard on the leap and Ike on the shuffle.
Right. I mean, and credit to Dan Dickow, who, of course, it's another just a little example of Beaver bias in the year, is that a Gonzaga legend and alum is the guy calling that game. That he pointed it out, but yeah, I mean, I think even before the Ike's fifth foul, and he was furious afterwards. I think he was shocked that they called it more than I was, but the Beavers were getting to the free throw line, and they were earning a lot of them, but there were also a lot of non-shooting fouls, and I think that's the effect of having 9,300 people packed into a place and being extremely loud and supportive, and that's what that does for you, and that's what we've been missing that some of these teams we've seen in the Pac-12 have. And yeah, Wayne Tinkle after the game talked about, I really hope that we can keep filling this place up now. The prior sellouts he's had, not to diminish them, but they were kind of one-off things. It was because Oregon was coming to town or Arizona was here, and everybody shows out and they play at another level when that's the case here. And so hopefully this is the one that, like Andy said, they're competing for a conference crown to some degree right now. And so hopefully they get some repeat visitors that haven't been at Gill as much lately.
Yeah, and looking at the schedule ahead, obviously at USF, but the next home game is Pepperdine, so like I do expect kind of quite a bit of a slope back down attendance wise on that one. But the next 6 games for Oregon State it's a really tough stretch. So at USF, Pepperdine, who has actually played pretty well in spots, who gave Gonzaga actually a bit of a run earlier in the conference schedule. Santa Clara, heading to the Kennel, then back home for Washington State and St. Mary's. When you look at this stretch of like what's for the next 6 at home, what's the scenario that's going to make you feel kind of good coming out of this? How many wins does that look like? What has to happen in these next 6 that's going to still kind of make you feel confident about the at-large potential?
Well, I would say for me, there's 2 levels. If they can get one of the road games, then I will feel extremely confident. Like if Oregon State carries over this momentum to San Francisco and wins on the road, that's huge. And to me, that like puts this team on another level that makes me extremely confident, because Oregon State this team has had close road losses this year, but in the last, Oregon State has 4 road wins in the last 4 years. So it's incredibly hard for this program to win consistently on the road. So if they get the San Francisco game tonight, I think that opens up another level. If they lose it, I'm not devastated, because again, I have the road kind of loss narrative built up in my mind. But I think if they win every game at home, then I'm still confident going past it. If they drop one of the home games, then things become pretty dicey for me.
I agree that if they can get one, if they win today, I think that they have a really decent case to be in. I think in most people's minds, they'll still be on the outside looking in, but they will firmly have the attention of all the bracketologists and the projectors. and everything like that. People who are at this point saying that they don't have the strength of schedule or enough signature wins or whatever. They've obviously crossed that one off by beating Gonzaga. But I'm remaining as optimistic I can about the way this team has played on the road, because as Andy's talked about, it's become ridiculous how poorly road games have gone since the Elite Eight run, the promise season. But that isn't necessarily fair to this year's Beaver team. This is obvious. We talked about they retooled the whole roster. They're obviously much better than they've been the past 3 years and even the past 2 years. This is a much more talented team. And this year's team is 1-3 in true road games. And one of those losses was by 3 to North Texas in a game where a kid who was 0 for 6 from the field hit a 3 with a couple of seconds left. A true gut punch game, but against a really good team. Then a 1-point loss to Santa Clara where it was an avalanche of things going wrong in the last 20 seconds and then the last 10 seconds again, but they were up 3 in that one with very little time left. And then a true dud, a clunker against LMU, which we hope can be kind of an isolated case. I think even really good teams get one of those on the road, and it remains to be seen, but I think LMU is good enough that loss will age okay, that they'll, especially at home, they just beat Santa Clara. So we'll revisit that one, but hopefully they exercise some of those demons by beating Pacific by 35 or whatever it was this past Saturday. And I know Pacific's bad, but they've beaten Washington State on the road. They have a couple of talented players, and I'd have been happy getting out of that with 18-point win, something like that. That'd have been more than good enough for me. That would have been taking care of business to me. But for them to set a record almost for free throw percentage in a game and look as dominant as they did, I'm hoping that can carry over today against an actually good team.
Yeah, I mean, that you talk about that Pacific one. I think one of the things Oregon State has done well throughout the course of the season is they have really crushed the teams that they're supposed to crush. And obviously that helps with the metrics. It helps with a lot of like the analytics and everything else. So that when you do have those close losses, like you've kind of given yourself a buffer. You mentioned the LMU loss. But yeah, it's like, I have been just looking at the numbers. I'm like, Oregon State's still in this. They're hanging around. They're like, they needed that signature win. They got it the other night. And so now it's like, there's momentum to be built here. And that does start tonight. They do play USF. So talk a little bit about that matchup. So you mentioned the road record for the Beavers, 1-3 away from in true road games.
Yeah.
USF is 11-0 at home. They defend the home court well. This is a team with maybe arguably the best backcourt in the conference, and Malik Thomas and Marcus Williams. When you're looking at this team, what are maybe some of the keys for the Beavers going into this one against, again, you mentioned a good USF team who has been able to kind of handle most of their business throughout conference play to this point?
Well, to me, the number one key, and I'm glad you brought him up, it's Marcus Williams, because he has a history with the Beavers. This is going to be the third time Oregon State has played him on a third different college team. And each time, going back to his freshman year at Wyoming, he has just put on a show against Oregon State. For some reason, we just like, I don't know, in his mind, he's next level against us. So we've seen him dominate before. I think what I'm looking for is, they have a strength in their backcourt, but Oregon State, I think, defensively matches up pretty well with them between DeMarco Minor and Josiah Lake. And I'm curious to see how the front court can go, particularly Parsifala, because he's really been on a tear the last 3 games after kind of getting a little bit lost in the mix a little bit in their Hawaii Christmas tournament and the first couple games of conference. So if he can continue on and play down low, I think Oregon State has a real front court advantage. But yeah, I'm definitely keying in on Marcus Williams because he has the Beavers number.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the key with San Francisco generally is who are you going to have guard Malik Thomas? And it's not on one guy. Wayne Tinkle is becoming almost more notorious with these schools that are getting to know him a little bit more recently for the different zones he uses and things like that. And we'll certainly see the Beavers use a lot of like 3/4 court, 1-2-2 type containment press where they might trap a little bit, but it's more just designed to get you to use 7-8 seconds to get the ball across half court and shorten the possession a little bit and slow the game down. Because especially at home, you don't want to get in a track meet with San Francisco. Now, they obviously just beat Gonzaga in a game 97-89. Like, the Beavers are more than capable of getting in an open court game and scoring a lot, but it's a little different when you're at home in that environment to do that. And so the way to slow them down, in addition to just guarding them effectively, is rebounding, which is, that's on primarily Parsifala and some of the depth they have at the post position. They only played 8 guys on Saturday, and Wayne Tinkle's kind of settled on his top 8 pretty firmly, but the guys outside of that are pretty talented. It's mostly post depth that they have. The 2 other backup guards they have, DeJon Craig and Jaquavis Williford, are talented guys who have had moments this year, but they did not dress for Gonzaga. And so hopefully they're back soon, but without them, I think it's really gonna be those same guys in the backcourt. We saw Josiah Lake, Nate Kings, and then DeMarco Minor, of course. And so it'll be interesting to me to see if guys like Maxime Logie or Johan Munch, who are a little bit raw, but they're talented, and have been on kind of the fringe of the rotation, get some time to give Parsifala a bit more of a rest. Matthew Marsh is the one backup post who did play some against Gonzaga, and he's kind of hit or miss, but he's a giant. And San Francisco's front line, they've got a very athletic 7-footer whose name...
Carlton Lingard Jr.
Lingard. Yeah, he's a shot blocker. He's a presence, but outside of him, they don't have as much beef up front. And I do like the matchup between Parsifala and Lingard. If he can win some battles against Graham Ike, I think he's so good at using his strength and body to seal people and put him on his back and give himself little 2-footers right in front of the rim. And Lingard may swat 1 or 2 of those, but I think overall this is going to be another nice game for Fala. Hopefully he makes his free throws. He was only 4 of 9 against Gonzaga, so that's more of a key in road games. You got to make those. But we've seen him hit a ton of them too. So to me, that's the biggest key or thing to look out for, is how many guys play off the bench.
I'll throw in a couple more because I just thinking about, because you mentioned just the front line of USF. The foul trouble, I think, is actually going to be a key factor in this one. Oregon State has been so good at drawing fouls and getting to the line. The USF front line is a little on the thin side right now. So I think if they get in the foul trouble early, that's going to be a huge advantage for the Beavers. But I'm also looking at the 3-point shooting of these 2 teams are very different in the style in which they play. OSU is the best percentage 3-point shooting team in the WCC. USF takes the second most, so they're going to rain down threes. Now, whether I have seen them have that be a huge advantage, but I've also seen that be an absolute disadvantage. When they played Santa Clara just last week, that they really died by the 3 in that one. So you get a good USF shooting team, and it's going to be a tight one. If you get a bad USF shooting team, Oregon State could potentially run away. But I'm going to just add that note as something else to kind of keep an eye on in this one.
Yeah. And I just want to double down and say the Beavers have never beat Marcus Williams, but maybe this is the real test. This team
got to do it at some point. It feels like they've had 10 chances at him.
And I will say that's the kind of doubling down is Malik Thomas. It's he might, again, this is someone he had a bad night the other night where he scored 20. That's been an off night since conference play has begun for that guy. So someone else to watch out for in this one. Guys, any parting thoughts as you're thinking about this matchup and just the coming off of Gonzaga and maybe what to look for with the Beavers in the next week or so?
Yeah, I would just encourage people to keep your eyes on the post play of Parsifala to see if this new turn in offense is legitimate, because if it does, then that completely opens up everything for Oregon State. And I think the fact that he's being so good down low and drawing a lot of those fouls, like you talked about with, he's not just going straight up. He's doing 20 pump fakes and then spinning around to his left before he shoots it every single time. I think that's really key. That opens it up for Michael Ratai. Look for him to stay on his dominant streak, and look for Nate Kings and DeMarco Minor to continue their strong play too. It seems like the starting 5 has really coalesced in this last week, and look to see if they can just keep pouring it on.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that's proven they can win games in different ways. We talked about 3-point shooting. They took 14 in a 45-minute game against Gonzaga and still had 97 points. I mean, they made 6 of them, so they're efficient with it. I don't think you want to get into a 3-point shootout with this San Francisco team at their place, but it would be huge if Nate Kings was as hot as he was on Thursday night. DeMarco Minor is the one from 3 that can run the most hot and cold most of the time. But if they're hitting their threes early, I think it's going to be very difficult for San Francisco to run away in this one, because I'm confident that Fall is going to get his looks around the rim. I think that Andy and I talked about it a little earlier in conference play, that Fall has started so good and was looking so dominant in the paint, and as the teams they played got a little bit better, it felt like they went away from him a little bit, and he wasn't getting those same looks. And starting with the second half against San Diego, when he went crazy a little bit, they've kind of rededicated themselves to getting him those post ups, and he's really delivered these past 3 games or so, and we saw him go absolutely crazy against Pacific, and then was great again against Gonzaga. More so when it wasn't Graham Ike guarding him, but even when Ike was his primary defender, he was getting to the line and he was getting shots off around the rim. And so I'm confident that even if he starts a little bit slow, that he's going to get his numbers. So if the other guards are hitting their outside shots, Isaiah C is a guy who is a terrific 3-point shooter. He's been kind of also ran very hot or cold, but if he's hitting them, they become a very, very different. And Lataris Alevicius, those guys have both been very good at times offensively and a little spotty at others. But if they're hitting shots, this is one of the more efficient offensive teams you'll see, certainly in this league.
All right. Thanks, guys, for hopping on and chatting some Oregon State hoops. We'll definitely catch up down the road. Sam, Andy from the Payton Years podcast, check them out. Thanks, guys, and good luck tonight against USF.
Appreciate
Thanks,
you, Zach.
Go Beavs.
Go Beavs. Thanks, man.
All right. So a preview of Oregon State and USF. This is going to be a really fun matchup again. Like, there's a lot of keys to this. Like, Oregon State's front line is going to be obviously a key factor in this one, how well they play against the USF front court. Michael Ratai, this is going to be some interesting matchups for USF. We're probably going to see a number of guys kind of take turns on Ratai. I could see Carlton Lingard pulling that assignment. I could see also it's going to be a Bosi or Wong are also going to pull some of that assignment as well. This backcourt, and as we know, like with USF, Malik Thomas is one of the best foul drawers in the league. He is, I believe, he's top in the league in free throws attempted. So just another key to watch out for. This is going to be a tough physical matchup between these two. But there were a lot of other matchups the other night that kind of had the key in on. One of those being Washington State and San Diego. Washington State was up 18-2 in that game, but ended up trailing at halftime. They did not retake the lead until minute 48 left in that one when Nate Calmes hit a 3. He had 27 on the night. And San Diego had a lot of opportunities late in that contest to win that ball game. And we've seen Washington State a couple different times now struggle with the bottom tier of the league. Obviously, they lost the game to Pacific a week and a half ago. They nearly lost this game at San Diego. So a little bit of concerning notes here for Washington State. A lot of it's like turnovers have been kind of killing them. 17 turnovers in the game against San Diego. And yes, San Diego also had 17 turnovers in that contest as well. But some concerning notes for Washington State. But at the very least, there's opportunity to kind of clean some of that mess up and get right. They will be hosting Portland later this afternoon. So that's the matchup up in Pullman for them. Portland coming off of a win against Pacific just the other night as well. That one went to overtime. So some momentum for the Pilots going into this one, and for Washington State, just some things they need to kind of clean up, get right. And really it's cleaning up mistakes. That's really for Washington State the biggest key in that one. So the other game to look at in today is going to be Santa Clara and Gonzaga. Now, Santa Clara the other night lost to LMU 57-54. This was The second time LMU has knocked off a kind of would-be at-large. Santa Clara was 4 for 26 from three in that game. I mentioned USF a little earlier being having taken the second most threes in the league. Well, Santa Clara takes the most. And sometimes like they have nights like this where they just do not shoot it well. Carlos Stewart and Elijah Mahi combined for all of 6 points, 2 for 13 from the field. Season low 54 points, which that is partly credit to LMU because this is a team that has played really well at home. They have wins over Nevada, over Oregon State, now over Santa Clara in that building. Stan Johnson's crew has figured out ways to make it scrappy, make some of these games ugly, and make teams play at that style. Caleb Stone Carroll had 19. He was the only line in double figures in that contest. So LMU having some momentum for them, and they'll be hosting San Diego. Another opportunity for them to kind of get closer to that 500 mark in conference play, as they obviously had that really tough opening stretch to kick off WCC. For Santa Clara going into this one, I mean, we have seen this team have very high highs, and some lows. And for this squad, their offense obviously needs to be right. They show up like this to the kennel and they're going to get blown out. Like this offense is not the team that can show up come tonight's game. Christoph Tilly had 25 in this one. That's a matchup like I think that is going to be very interesting to watch as Tilly and EK going back and forth. Christoph Tilly has played really well over the last few weeks. He did miss the game against San Diego, but this is someone who has been one of their top 3 players all season long. This is someone who has really developed his game to also have a bit more of an outside component to it. We've seen him hit threes every so often, but really a lot of his damage is still being done inside in the paint. I think the key for this matchup like Tilly and EK is whoever can stay out of foul trouble is probably going to be better off. Both of them have had some foul trouble issues over the course of the season. Tilly has had those issues. EK has had those issues. Whoever can stay on the court the longest is going to obviously like really benefit their team. And I do think that definitely leans a bit more towards Santa Clara. If Tilly can stay on the court, that is a different squad that the Broncos are able to run out there. Obviously, if EK gets in foul trouble, you still have Braden Huff sitting right behind him, who is going to obviously present different challenges for Santa Clara. And I think one of the things to watch is the guards in this matchup, both Santa Clara's guards versus Gonzaga's guards, because what we're watching here is the size difference between these two teams. Santa Clara is a very big team between Mahi, Ball, and then Carlos Stewart versus the likes of Caleb Battle, Nolan Hickman, and Brian Nemhard. Like the size difference is, I think, going to play a little bit of a factor here. The style of play of these guys is also going to be a factor. And Carlos Stewart, Ryan Nemhard is going to be a fun one to watch because these two have not faced off with each other before. But Carlos Stewart is someone who, while this is his first year back at Santa Clara, knows what this feels like going into the game in the kennel. He's played in these games before. He is someone who seems to rise when the occasion calls for it in bigger games. We saw that against USF. He had 25 in that second half. But Santa Clara needs to get off to a good start. Like they can't start slow like they did against USF. They can't start slow like they did against LMU. If you start slow at the kennel, that's when a game can get away from you. They have to start out fast. They're going to have to start out efficient. You're going to need a good night out of Elijah Mahi. I think you're going to need a good night out of Johnny O'Neill. Johnny O'Neill is a key factor in this one where it's like he and Ben Gray going back and forth is going to be fascinating to watch because they're a bit of similar players. Like they don't need the ball necessarily to make an impact. And both of them are going to really be critical in having those opportunities. And that could be the way that this game gets pushed one way or the other. And the Santa Clara team knows how to beat this Gonzaga squad. They did it a year ago with essentially the same group. They went up to the kennel last year and played pretty well. And they're now catching Gonzaga at a point where about the same point where the Broncos beat them a year ago, but also now on a point where they are coming off of a loss against a good team in Oregon State, but also that some of the challenges that Gonzaga has had all year long presented itself again. These late game situations, they have yet to figure out how to close the deal in a lot of these games. Throughout the course of the season, we have seen this from the Zags, and it seems almost kind of inexplicable of how this keeps happening because you look at what the pieces that they have with Ryan Nemhard. It feels like when you have a guard like that, you should be able to kind of manage these situations and come out of these more often than not on top. And we just haven't seen that. The best player of the other night down the stretch was Graham Ike, and he ended up fouling out with 2:01 left in overtime. And as we kind of off talked with uh, the Payton years, Andy and Sam, it's like that fifth foul just seems soft, and that shouldn't have happened, but it did, and that really pushed all the momentum to Oregon State side as they were able to close that game out. Gonzaga's defense is also a concern. This is a team that has not played really good defense as of late, especially against good offensive teams. They allowed Oregon State to shoot 58% from the field. Washington State just last week shot 53% from the field at the kennel. And the Santa Clara team is a team that will score averages 80 plus points a game. The aberration really was the game against LMU, and I would expect Santa Clara to be a much better offensive team this time around going to Spokane and playing in this contest. And with Gonzaga's defense not really having done the job recently, if there's a concern, it might be that if Gonzaga continues to play the defense that we've seen as of late, Santa Clara is going to be in this game the whole way through, but the Broncos are going to have to get going early. And slow starts have been unfortunately part of what we've seen from them the last few weeks. And they need to get off to a good start if they're going to have a shot. Gonzaga needs to play better defense if they're going to pull out a win and get back into the win column. And Santa Clara, like they're still kind of on that hovering of like, I keep thinking and talked last week about how this Santa Clara team is like, they're right on the cusp. Like they could get some key wins and not lose to the teams they're not supposed to lose to. Then they went and lost to LMU, but it didn't look like it damaged their resume too much. I was taking a look. I mean, they're still hovering in the six, or they're at 70 right now. But that was their third quad 3 loss, which again, like Santa Clara in the quad 3 losses is probably kind of sealed their fate in on that respect. But this is still a good Santa Clara team. This is a team that is very capable of going into the kennel and winning. So I'm thinking, I'm looking at the keys of that game. I'm going to look at what Carlos Stewart is going to do. I'm looking at whether or not they can shoot well from 3, and it's Christoph Tilly staying out of foul trouble. For Santa Clara, I think if Carlos Stewart plays well, if Tilly stays out of foul trouble and they can shoot the 3 decently well, they'll be in this contest to the very end. For Gonzaga, it's play better defense. Like just don't allow your opponent to shoot more than 50%. If they can play at least even a slightly better defense in this one, I think they're going to be fine. They'll get back into the win column and start to have some level of momentum going back their direction. But if they continue to have these poor defensive outings, this is going to continue to bite them, as this is a deeper WCC than we have seen in a lot of recent years, especially that group between that 3 to 6 range is much tougher. And Gonzaga is going to have to play better if they hope to be able to kind of get through this recent stretch that they have. All right, so the other games happening on today. So all 5 WCC games today. Mentioned Portland at Washington State, Santa Clara at Gonzaga. That's at 6 on ESPN Plus. San Diego at LMU, Oregon State at San Francisco, And the other one, St. Mary's at Pepperdine. So that one matchup, St. Mary's has yet to allow a WCC opponent to score more than 60. One of those teams was Pepperdine earlier in the year. So keep an eye on that one just to see how Pepperdine is able to rebound from their loss the other night to USF, which was a 17-point drubbing by the Dons. And St. Mary's is maybe playing its best basketball right now. Final game of St. Mary's playing this incredibly kind of soft stretch of the WCC schedule where they have played the bottom half of the league. That all ends after the game tonight, where they will then play the top half of the league for the next essentially month. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Ton of WCC basketball. We'll be back early next week to recap what we all saw on Saturday, and then also start to preview what Thursday is going to look like in league play. A ton of great basketball coming up. All right, that'll do it. Follow along on social media at Post by Zach and at Unofficial WCC Pod. Follow along on all the streaming services as well. And that'll do it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.